Welcome back to the What Did He Mean by That podcast. I'm here with Dr. Christopher Cali, Pastor Chris Heimerle, Ashley Cali, and I'm Robby McKinney. This past weekend, Pastor Chris preached on where we find our worth in the importance of remembering that it is found from the Lord. Join us today as we continue the conversation on how to find our self-worth.
Hey, Chris, so I have a question, kind of to do with our series in this past weekend. What made you preach the series, or the end of the series, through the lens of the family in regards to evil and suffering?
Well, I think it's because when we experience a deep relationship, that's the areas that we experience hurt in its deepest form, or suffering in its deepest form, when those relationships fall apart, where death enters in, where anger and fracturing in those relationships. Those are the relationships that affect us in the deepest way. And we experience suffering and different forms of evil or sin is probably a better word when it comes to relationships in the deepest way in those. And if the family's the core of where God wants us to experience who he is in and of himself, and that's the target of the enemy, and that's the place of our deepest relationships, I just biblically and thinking through it from just the way I think of it in my head, that's a place where the practical nature of experiencing evil and suffering really takes place the most in our lives. We feel the most pain there.
Yeah, and I think that ties into kind of like, so like I feel like your sermon kind of was like anger and then self-worth.
Yeah.
Right? I think that ties into the self-worth part of that.
Yep, and I was trying to say, what I was trying to find in that was what's the deepest source of our anger. So when, like, self-worth isn't the only place we experience anger. Like, there's lots of places. Impatience. We were talking about it today before we got in the podcast room. Righteous anger. Anger isn't always a sin. But where anger really begins to develop in our lives from an early stage in our relationships, really, a lot of times, generally speaking, it comes from our sense of self-worth because someone's slighting us or treating us in a way we don't think is right or what we're worthy of. And then if you're looking at the story of Joseph, really that's what's going on there.
Yeah.
There's brothers that are looking at the relationship between their father and the youngest son and essentially saying he's getting something that we deserved. And when that happens in our lives, a lot of times we're equating that to our self-worth.
Yeah. I also think, I guess it's easy for us to say, like, well, don't be angry, right? But if someone's dealing with getting looked over for a promotion or maybe something in their family, or you gave a bunch of examples of, like, people that are anger that comes out of jealousy.
Yeah.
Either of that in the family or work or in your social life, not getting invited to something.
Yep.
How do you deal with that?
Yep. And let's talk biblically, right? So when you're looking at the story of Joseph, you're seeing that's what's going on. There's selfish ambition, there's jealousy, that's creating hatred and anger for another family member. Then we went to the James passage where it talks about selfish ambition and that being a root of everything that's unspiritual, that's earthly, and where James even relates it to demonic activity. And then, so you're looking at these situations in our lives where selfish ambition, jealousy, a lot of this I'm just talking out of my own experience. Working 18 years in the finance industry, I have experienced selfish ambition and jealousy at people that I thought were getting paid more than me when they shouldn't have been, or getting a promotion, or they're getting praise and I'm not, and all of a sudden at work you start to see this selfish ambition arise inside myself. And so a lot of my preaching this weekend was my own experiences.
Yeah.
And the way you deal with that in your life is you have to recognize that your self-worth isn't rooted in the system that you set up what other people think about you. You have to recognize that your self-worth is rooted in what God thinks about you, what Christ sacrificed for you, how you were created in his image. And because of that, your worth is immeasurable. It was the Father's love to send his Son because of your worth to him. He loved you and he wanted to save you. And we can't measure our self-worth. And if you noticed on the weekend, I kept saying the way you're interpreting that action towards you. Because a vast majority of the time, at least I've experienced in my life, is I was interpreting their actions wrongly.
Yeah.
So I'm interpreting the things that are happening as if they're doing this because they don't like me, or they're doing this because they don't think I'm worth this, or they're doing this because they think less of me. And the reality is that I've noticed in my life, I was probably wrong more than 50% of the time. Mm-hmm. And so I'm interpreting something that's happening coming from someone else. And then I'm looking at myself and getting this negative view of who I am because of what's happening. And then it is creating anger in my life. And it's the root of that is selfish ambition and jealousy. I feel slighted. And it's doing nothing but destroying my own life and my own relationships.
Yeah, and I think looking at it as your worth comes through Christ, but also how it actually plays out. Just because someone's getting married doesn't mean you're never going to get married.
Exactly.
Right? Just because someone's having a baby doesn't mean you're never going to have a baby. Just because someone has a promotion doesn't mean you're never going to have a promotion.
Yeah.
And I think this is also tying it to the passage of rejoice with those who rejoice.
Yeah.
Like we could turn our anger into caring about these people.
And you get
rejoicing
into a
with them.
place where now you can never rejoice for other people because they're getting something that you want. I've said this a lot of times. I was single until how old was I 40? When I got married? And my wife's, I was 40. I was 40 when I got married. And being single, especially in the church, is like you might as well just brand yourself as a loser. Sorry, Robby. I'm just kidding.
Podcast is turning sour very quick.
No, but you know what I'm saying.
How
I mean, you feel like because everyone's like, oh, you're incomplete. Oh, God will bring you that one as if, oh, I need that person to make me a whole person.
Yeah.
And I remember for years and years and years, even being a single pastor.
Yeah.
And then, oh, you're not married, and and it's like the guys that are married that have kids have attained real life and real spirituality. And us single guys, we'll get it someday.
But there's a blessing to being single too.
Yeah.
I've been talking to some of my friends that are my age who are pastors at other churches, and they're married with a new kid and stuff, and they're saying, man, I miss when I was single because you can just do so much ministry.
Yeah.
Like there's when you have a wife and kid, what a blessing that is. But that's responsibility.
And that's Paul's words to people.
Yeah.
Hey, you get married with kids in the situation that's going on in our culture, and it's going to be you're going to have to worry about your wife and your kids as well as the church.
Yeah.
Where if you stay single, you can worry about the church.
Yeah.
But I remember being the single guy, and exactly what you're saying. My friends, I remember sitting at a wedding and thinking, and it was one of my good friends, and anger was just inside me because I was like, why does he get to get married and not me? And those like I couldn't be happy for my friend that's getting married because he was getting something. And in that, do you see when you're acting like that, or when I was acting like that, I'm equating my self-worth to my marital status.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, you date someone and they don't feel the same way that you feel about them, and all of a sudden, what is that to you? They think less of me. I'm not good enough for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that plays out in work. That plays out everywhere.
And it plays into your self-worth.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're starting to think, oh, I'll never find that person because I'm not worth it, because I'm not good enough.
Yeah. It spirals.
And you're gauging your worth based on whether someone wants to date or marry you or not. And that's not, we can't do that. that's the wrong area to gauge what we're worth.
Well, and you see it in the world all the time, too. And it's those outside of Christ that don't know Christ that are always striving for the next thing. And if I just get this, and if I just get this, I'll be happy. And you said it this way. It's that I deserve this, and it results in anger. But this is where you talked about that we'll never be happy with this system of self-worth because it's a failure system across the board.
It's always going to fail.
You're always going to be unhappy, depression, anxiety, because we're dictating our self-worth in the response of other people.
Yep.
But what I wanted to come in on the other side of that, too, is we're talking about how we feel and how we view and the perspective. But what is a practical way? I'm just thinking as parents, how can we help our kids not feel their self-worth by what mom and dad approve of and tell them they're doing great? Or how do we continue to direct them to the gaze of what the Bible says and practically from the other side of this?
Yeah, I think you have at least one thing you can do is you have to teach them how much Christ loves them.
Yeah.
How he cares for them. We're going to go this weekend, a little view into where we're going to go this weekend is John the Baptist. The next passage in the book of John, chapter 3, is John's disciples begin to come to him and say, Jesus has got all these people going to him. They're not coming to us anymore. And you see John's sense of self-worth is not dictated by the fact that everyone's coming to him. His sense of self-worth is actually dictated on the fact that they're leaving him to go to Christ.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And he makes the statement, we have nothing in this life that isn't given to us from the hand of God. And if we start to teach our children that, they don't get into the rat race. The rat race is, well, I don't have the good title, I don't have the good job, I don't have the big enough bank account. And then you get the job, but you don't have the next job because there's always someone that has the next job that you don't have. And so you slide your self-worth from the thing that you were trying to obtain to now the next thing that you want to obtain. And that's what I mean by it's a system of failure.
I have another question with this because we've talked a lot about jobs, relationships. What about parents who put their self-worth in how their kids perform or their kids act? I feel like that's a big thing.
It's just another slide, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, especially when it comes to sports, like sports is the big thing around here. Parents will just give up everything, including the church, for a sport for their kid. And I've said this a million times. Frankly, your kid's never going to be a pro.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, 99.99999% of the kids that are in the families that are giving their lives away for high school sports, by the time those kids are in their mid-20s, you're never going to think of it again. You're looking at, if it's baseball, you're looking at the softball league. If it's basketball, you're looking at pick up upward.
Yeah.
I mean, but you've thrown your whole lives into this.
Yeah.
All your money, you've made it an idol. And a lot of times, not everyone, but a lot of times this is because the parent's self-worth is wrapped up in the kid's accomplishment in the sport, either that they did really well and they're affirmed by the fact that their son or their daughter is doing really well, or they didn't do really well and they're affirmed by the fact that their son or their daughter is excelling. Now that's not always the case.
Or it could be education, it could be behavior.
Well, and I
behavior,
also
everything.
think it's not black and white. It's really gray,
Yeah.
right? And there's a part where, yes, we're called to steward and disciple our kids. And that means that we have work to do as parents, and we're called to do that, and that's okay. But then we also have to understand that God is sovereign, and He is in control of salvation in their lives, and bringing about true repentance and the heart, that we don't just do nothing. So it's kind of, well, where do I put too much on myself and think I'm God and I'm, these kids are great because of me? It goes back to God gives the gifts, and I have to recognize and even share with my kids that, like, well, God made you beautiful. Like, that's not because of mom and dad. Like, we had nothing to do with that. And continuing to, I think, verbalize that with your kids so that they hear and they know this. And then also help and communicate with them. So it's a both and, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not just for you and it doesn't reflect poorly or badly, but it can if you take the other approach and you're removing your hand, and I don't have to do anything because they're in God's hands.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say too, you're right, it's not black and white. Just because everyone's, just because you're engaged in the sports of your kids doesn't mean it's an idol.
No.
Yeah.
But I would say you should check your motivation.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
your
like,
if
check
your
your
worth
heart.
is found in how they're doing or
Yes.
how you could brag about them.
If you're that parent that's losing his mind at a high school game
or upward game.
or an upward game, I would question if that's not something. Why are you so upset about whether that call goes your kid's way or not? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like it's a game.
And probably a really good teaching moment.
Yeah, but why is there all that anger building up? Why is that coming out in the way it is? Or even maybe you're not one of those parents, but it's just the thing that has become the focus of your life. Anytime something becomes the focus of our lives, it doesn't have to be sports. It can be jobs, money, relationships. It could be anything. Anytime something becomes an overly focused point of our lives, we need to begin to examine that and say, have I made this into an idol? And from the perspective of the last weekend's message, maybe we should say to ourselves, if it's creating anxiety, depression, anger when things don't work out the way we want them to in those situations, I would say we should examine that and say, am I finding a sense of self-worth in that?
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, right? Because I shouldn't be. Like, my performance in anything shouldn't dictate what I'm worth.
Yeah.
It's Jesus' sacrifice for me that dictates what I'm worth in this world. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the What Did He Mean by That podcast. We would love to see you this weekend at 6 p.m. on Saturday and 9 and 11 a.m. on Sunday.